Yeah, I was going to start out with how colonels are better than majors and why they're so great. Is Major Dwight here tonight? Is
Yes.
he? Okay, then we'll skip that. We're not talking about that. Um, so I
Love
decided,
it, Logan. But hey, before
let's,
you go on, Major Door, do you have any comments on that?
Fall asleep. I'm sorry. No, but I woke up in time to listen to Private Logan because I'll see him next time on guard duty for 3 hours.
Fair
Good
enough.
oh
job,
well.
Logan. Go for it, buddy. It looks good.
So I thought I was going to talk about when you do research on Confederate uniforms, they come in every color under the sun. Because they tried to do cadet gray, which I'll talk about that. That was in their official papers and everything. But that was not a realistic goal because the Confederacy was never good at dyes and cloth. They would go from just all sorts of shades of gray to colors like butternut, which we hear about. But around, but there is this color called cadet gray, and it's spelled with an A instead of an E, which is a bit strange. But one of the members of A.P. Hill's Corps, a Georgian, made this comment upon receiving his uniform that it's a blue in color, but not like the Yankee blue. And if you could see in the background, there's this coat, and it's kind of bluish, but it's still gray. And that's kind of how cadet gray becomes in the middle to the end of the war. But it was the official uniform of a lot of state and um, local groups. They wore a version of cadet gray. Here's this uniform off to the right with a shotgun blast. That's Colonel Ellsworth's uniform. He's the first Union officer to die in the Civil War, and that's his uniform. It's up in a museum in New York City. But I mean, not New York City, I mean the state of New York. And that's his uniform. That's considered a version of cadet gray, along with this tailored made Confederate uniform that's also in the color cadet gray. Early on in the war, it's a very light shade. It's more gray. It's commonly used by the state forces. So when you go to Manassas, the first Battle of Bull Run, and we always hear the stories of how everyone's in all sorts of color uniforms, people on both sides were wearing gray because it was the common state uniform. And that's why the Confederates adopted gray, is because it was considered the states, and the Confederates, the South in general, was really emphasized state government, states' rights. We'll hear it multiple times throughout history when you look at the South and its political goals. It would become, this color would be adopted by the CSA, and it was considered the official color, but like I said before, it wasn't ever used as frequently as it would be hoped. But by the middle of the war to the late end of the war, the Confederacy starts importing cloth from England, and it's this bluish gray color. And I actually did some research, and they have the exact combination of how they got that color. And they started getting it as probably as early as the late winter of 1862. So probably late 1862 to 1865, this color starts coming in. And from 1864 to 1865, you'll see it a lot, and it will become the main color of the Richmond Depot 3 uniforms. It'll be the color of all the Tate jackets, the Peter Tate jackets that are coming from Ireland, but you'll also see it on Type 2 jackets. And so here's some examples here at the bottom, and it may just be the lighting, but you can kind of see the difference in shades. It's this dark bluish gray color compared to our previous lighter shade, and you'll see, you can kind of compare it to an actual blue color from the one on the left in the middle that has trim. And this is the cloth that was used from England. So they did a study. This Frederick Adolphus, I went onto his site, and he apparently studied this, and he had talked to some sort of person who specialized in this, and he says, according to Bentart, which I believe is the guy he talked to, weavers during the Civil War made cadet gray cloth by mixing indigo dyed medium to dark blue wool with white wool at a rate of 50% blue and 50% white, or 60% blue and 40% white. The black wool was mixed in at a proportion of 1/6, 1/8, or 1/12 of the batch. The black wool was produced by dyeing clean white wool with logwood dye. Sometimes the logwood dyed wool would be further dyed with dark blue indigo dye to make it yet blacker. as one might summarize, with all the variables posited, the range of shades for the cadet gray color would be numerous. And he even went on in his article and talked about more how there was even more mixing of all these different shades to get that unique color. And so I would end off with our Confederate examples, but these guys on the left, those are modern day cadet gray uniforms for those at West Point. And you can kind of see that shade. It's still in use by the cadets today. And also on the right, was also considered a cadet gray uniform, is what the Austro-Hungarians wore in World War I. So this color has had a long use throughout history. And you can see here again on the left side, that's where we get cadet from, cadet gray, because it is worn by our cadets in the West Point Academy.
Well
I think
done.
that's all my
Logan.
slides.
Well done.
Logan,
Nice.
question. I have a question. The dark Richmond gray, the almost black, dark gray. What's your knowledge of that?
I actually did look that up because I know Wolf likes to mention it because I think he knows a little more about it, or he's looked into it. That's what Andrew wears, right? Sergeant Andrew?
Yeah, and Captain Porterfield of the 8th Florida's got a captain's coat that's almost black. I've seen that before. So what do you know about that?
I actually did a little research, and some guys on a Civil War forum, I believe they talked about it, and that it was probably just another thing that resulted from the Confederacy needing cloth and materials, and so they were just finding whatever dye they could. Also, if you look at some of those examples of jackets, they get really, really dark from the mixing of cloths and dyes and everything. They get really, really dark in color. So I'm thinking, every once in a while they mixed it together, however they did, got a really black color, or maybe they were in short supply of, let's say, another color, say regular gray, so they just kind of mixed what they got and did with use what they had.
Let me ask you this: knowing that 2nd Florida got most of their stuff from the Richmond Depot, and they did. Eric from the Liberty Guard sent me a lot of information on quartermaster receipts from the 2nd Florida, and they got most of their stuff, if not all of it, from the Richmond Depot. What do you think, if for us to be accurate portrayal of the 2nd Florida, what should we be wearing at 2nd Florida?
Depends on the time, depending on what we're issued. So I know we didn't serve at Manassas, but we served right after. And I think what Steve was just talking about, how they weren't really issued uniforms yet. So I don't know. I wouldn't say if we got Richmond Depot 1 at all. I wouldn't know. Richmond Depot 1, none of those jackets exist in museums or anything today. You can't find artifacts. So they're kind of harder to study. But looking at, since we're part of the Army of Northern Virginia, there's tons of artifacts for the Army of Northern Virginia. You'll find a lot of Richmond Depot 2 or Richmond Depot 3. And those Richmond Depot 3, you'll find some in cadet gray, not all of them. It was just starting to trickle in. Echoes of Glory talks about it a little bit too, because an officer has a cadet gray uniform, but that color was originally meant only for enlisted men. So he somehow got that when he maybe wasn't supposed to. So I'd say if we stick to Richmond Depot 2, you can kind of see what the color is around there. But if we're doing a very late war impression, that cadet gray was used in Richmond Depot 3 and all the Peter Tate jackets, because the quartermasters and everything, I forgot to mention this, at the end of the war, 1864 to 1865, you find that color so much because the quartermasters were really cracking down on uniformity. So they're really wanting everyone to be the same to rival their Yankee enemy, because the Yankees were, of course, well uniformed. So by the end of the war, since they were getting this cloth imported from England, they were really putting it to use. So they said, Frederick Adolphus also mentioned that all the caps and jackets were generally cadet gray. The pants were still they could be a variety of materials, jeans and all that, but he said the coats and the caps were mostly cadet gray at the time. And also at the end of the war, you still have a slouch hat. So you don't have to get a cap. You can still wear your slouch hat, but the jackets and caps for sure at the end of the war, there are a lot of cadet gray circulated around.
All right, thanks. Okay, very good stuff.